After this woman got married, not only did she not get any affection from her husband, but there was even a family photo of her husband and his ex-wife hanging on the wall of their home. Lan Ai is a single mother. She married Ji-ho, who has 2 daughters, and took his son after the wedding. In order to appear happy in front of her mother, Lan Ai bought some expensive ingredients at the supermarket for her mother, and told her mother that Ji-ho had told her to do so before going out. Lan Ai didn't know that as soon as she swiped her card at the counter, her husband received a notification of the purchase. Ji-ho's expression at this time was slightly displeased. After returning home, he hurriedly opened the refrigerator to check, but found that there was no increase in food in the house. So Ji-ho quietly took out his wife's account book and checked it, and only then discovered that his wife had actually used his money to subsidize her mother-in-law, and her mother knew that her daughter's remarried family was having a hard time. Unfortunately, the family urgently needed 5 million in cash to repay the loan, so her mother had no choice but to ask her daughter for a few days. Lan Ai was embarrassed to refuse, so she went to the counter to withdraw cash using her husband's card, but found that her husband's card had already had its password changed. In the end, she could only look at her mother with embarrassment and make up an excuse that she had accidentally forgotten the password. After the children had finished eating, Lan Ai carefully asked her husband for the password to his bank card, lying that she needed cash to buy some kitchen supplies. Unexpectedly, her husband refused her request without saying a word. Lan Ai saw this and did not dare to say anything more, but her actions had already caused resentment in her husband's heart. Lan Ai's humility made her son feel neglected in the family. When the family went out to eat for a holiday, Lan Ai was too busy trying to please her husband to pay attention to her son. She kept giving her husband's 2 daughters meat on their spoons. Her husband then scolded her son for not paying attention to his food. Lan Ai hurriedly took away the toy her son was holding after hearing this. Not only that, but even when they were eating at home, her 2 daughters constantly complained about the food Lan Ai made, saying it was hard to eat. This greatly affected the physical development of the 2 sisters. Even though Lan Ai always puts the food in front of her 2 daughters, she still can't get her husband to smile. When her eldest daughter complains unreasonably, the kind Lan Ai can only pretend to smile and nod in agreement. However, at this time, her aunt, who had been out, also returned home. When the daughters saw this, they hurriedly and happily went up to ask for gifts. Unsurprisingly, their aunt's gifts were also only for the 2 daughters, and Lan Ai's son could only sit there and watch with envy. After the children fell asleep, Ji-ho went straight to his wife and questioned her about the recent spending that she had not reported to him. Lan Ai was very surprised that her husband knew about it. Ji-ho then said that he had set up text message alerts, although he did not mean to spy on Lan Ai. He did not want to be taken lightly just because he was making money from his business. The next day, Lan Ai's father was selling scrap metal. Unexpectedly, on his way home, he found his son-in-law taking his 2 daughters out for a big meal. When the old father saw this, his heart was not at ease. He understood that his grandson had not been approved by his son-in-law at this time, so he went to the school to pick up his grandson after school, and then took him to a restaurant for a barbecue, and bought him a toy. When Lan Ai learned about this, she hurried out, because she had fallen out with her father over her insistence on getting remarried. Lan Ai watched her father's aging back gradually disappear, and her eyes instantly filled with tears of self-reproach. Meanwhile, her son and younger sister were fighting over the toy. When her sister saw this, she immediately told her brother to kneel down and apologize. When Lan Ai returned home, she heard her eldest daughter tell her off. After the eldest daughter took her younger sister to the bedroom, Lan Ai directly taught her son to let his younger sister play with the toys first, but she didn't know that those were the toys that her grandfather had just bought him with great difficulty. The next day was her father-in-law's birthday. After the family was done with their errands, they all sat at the table with blank expressions, because Lan Ai's husband was still not there. When the son-in-law arrived, the mother-in-law hurriedly came forward to greet him with a bow, but her son-in-law looked disgusted and pulled away his hand, and dropped the gift in his hand, and after a few casual greetings, he turned and left directly. Even so, the mother-in-law still insisted on seeing her son-in-law downstairs, but her father was very dissatisfied with her mother's behavior, and accused her of not being subservient to her son-in-law. After that, he angrily got up and left the table. Lan Ai also shed tears of self-reproach. At this time, her mother was also very aggrieved. She felt that she had done nothing wrong for her daughter. The next day, the mother-in-law went to a class reunion. Listening to her old classmates mock her daughter's miserable second marriage, the mother-in-law's heart was filled with anger. At a critical moment, she saw her son-in-law and daughter outside the door, so she forcibly pulled her son-in-law in, without any concealment. She praised her son-in-law's financial resources. Ji-ho suddenly understood the mother-in-law's intentions. He directly said that today's expenses would all be paid by him. Seeing this, the mother-in-law directly told the waiter to serve more good ingredients, and she forcibly made her son-in-law sit down and have a drink with everyone, but he ended up spilling the food all over his son-in-law. This made Ji-ho feel very annoyed when he got home. Lan Ai could only serve her mother-in-law with caution. When her mother-in-law got home, She told her family about her experience today, but her father was very worried about his daughter after hearing about it. Her mother-in-law is too respectful, and her son-in-law will have a hard time. In the end, it is their daughter who will suffer. But despite her husband's persuasion, her mother-in-law still didn't think it was a problem. On the other side, Lon and I's son and sister started fighting over a toy again. The two children had a fight over it. The eldest daughter heard it and directly hit her younger brother. And Lon and I in the kitchen heard her sons crying but didn't dare to go out. It wasn't until her aunt, who had been awakened, came out that the children stopped. Facing her aunt's accusations, Lon and I didn't dare to defend her son. She could only make her son suffer to calm the anger of the whole family. Afterwards, Tom, who was worried about his mother, went to the kitchen to visit her. He happened to catch her crying alone. When the old father came to visit his grandson the next day, he learned from Tom that his daughter was not doing well. After hearing this, the father couldn't help but call his son-in-law. He hoped that his son-in-law would take care of his daughter and grandson more. However, when Jiho returned home, he immediately warned Lon and I not to spread family matters outside. If she has any grievances, she can tell him. He didn't want outsiders to interfere in his family affairs. In order to verify whether his daughter is happy at home, the three people from her family prepared to take gifts to her house to see for themselves. After Lon and I learned the news, she quickly took down the photo of her husband and ex-wife. After an awkward chat, the son-in-law and father-in-law got up and went to the bedroom. While wandering around, the father-in-law accidentally discovered this photo hidden by his daughter. After looking at the terrified expression on his grandson's face, the father's heart probably understood that a woman's life is not as glamorous as it seems. After returning home, the father looked at the refrigerator full of food and suddenly felt a sense of guilt. At this time, his wife returned home with the tonic she bought for her son. When she learned that her daughter had paid for it again, the father immediately became furious and threw all the food in the fridge away. That day, Lon and I specially dressed up nicely, hoping to have sex with her husband tonight. Unexpectedly, her husband fled the room with the excuse of working overtime. This made Lon and I feel particularly disappointed. Her husband's absence for the whole night made her feel suspicious. However, the next day, Lon and I felt that she had misunderstood her husband because Jiho decided to bring her to the company's couples party for the first time, which showed that her husband still recognized her in his heart. Unexpectedly, the crowd at the scene cast surprised glances at her. Lon and I saw this and timidly left because she felt that she was fundamentally out of place with everything here. Finally, someone took the initiative to talk to her, but the other party questioned whether she was Jiho's wife and why she looked different from the last time she saw her. This remark immediately made Lon and I's mood plummet. It turned out that her husband still had not completely disclosed his identity to everyone. Just as Lon and I was in distress, she suddenly noticed someone accidentally fall into the pool. Lon and I, anxious to save someone, jumped in, but forgot that she couldn't swim. With Lon and I shouting for help, the two were quickly rescued. However, when she got home, not only did she not receive any attention from her husband, but he blamed her for embarrassing him at the banquet. Jiho even blamed his wife for not being able to close the deal. This made Lon and I feel deeply guilty once again. However, when Jiho went to the hospital to visit the person who had fallen into the water, unexpectedly, the partner expressed his gratitude to him with excitement and said that he could sign the contract with him immediately, which made Jiho feel very happy. So he went to the flower shop and bought a bouquet of flowers and gave them to his wife directly when he got home. Lon and I's heart revealed an unshakable joy. At this time, Jiho opened the closet and looked at the well-organized clothes and the clean and tidy bedroom, and then thought about the mess when he was living with his ex-wife before. Jiho felt guilty and directly hugged Lon and I. The next day, he took the children to the supermarket to buy toys. His son looked at the more expensive ones on the top shelf and after some thought, he picked up the cheapest little toy. Lon and I saw this and picked up a big one and asked her son why he didn't want it. Unexpectedly, her son said it was because it wasn't his mother's money. Her son's good behavior made Lon and I feel heartbroken. Later, when Lon and I was about to send the children to school, her son expressed his desire to go to his sister's kindergarten. Lon and I could only lie and say that there were no vacancies for the time being. The helpless son could only watch his sister leave on the school bus with envy. The next day, her mother called Lon and I and told her that the daughter of the neighbor's family had finally broken up with her husband because he had not cut off contact with his ex-wife. So her mother suggested that they quickly register the grandson's household registration under her son-in-law's family. This way, they could keep her son-in-law firmly tied to the family, and Tom will have to go to school when he grows up. Finally, after Lon and I's careful consideration, she finally gathered the courage to raise the issue of her son's household registration with her husband that night. Jiho did not evade the issue and agreed directly and cheerfully, although this was a trivial matter. Lon and I suddenly felt a burst of happiness in her heart. However, the next day when Jiho consulted a lawyer about the matter, unexpectedly the lawyer said that if the son was registered, then he would have the same property distribution rights as his two daughters. Jiho was deeply perplexed after hearing this. In order to please her husband and his daughter, Lan and I personally prepared meals and cakes at home for her daughter, in order to take care of the family. Lan and I even neglected her own biological son. Tom said he was hungry and wanted to eat, but she told him to hold on. Soon Lan and I prepared a big table of dishes. However, her husband and daughter did not come home for a long time. She sent a text message to her husband, but did not receive any response. It turned out that her husband had taken the child to meet his ex-wife. The four of them were already happily celebrating her daughter's birthday. At this moment, Lan and I noticed that there was a kind of seasoning missing in the house. On her way to the supermarket, she saw her husband's car. Then Lan and I saw a scene that made her extremely sad. Seeing her husband and his ex-wife happily together, Lan and I felt a sense of utter despair. Her repeated forbearance had only brought her countless cruel tortures. Unexpectedly, this scene was seen by her father, who happened to be passing by. She asked Lan and I what those people were doing. When she learned that it was her husband's daughter's birthday, her father immediately wanted to go and ask. Lan and I, however, begged him not to. Her father scolded Lan and I for being so useless, and why she kept putting up with it. Watching her father's sad back as he left, Lan and I could no longer control the grievances in her heart. After returning home, her mind was filled with the words her father had used to educate her. Lan and I couldn't bear to let her father worry about her anymore, so her husband finally returned home with his daughter, lying that the kindergarten party had gone on too long, and after that, he didn't forget to ask Lan and I's son to come over for dinner. But Tom said he had just eaten some of his sister's cake crumbs. Perhaps Jiho felt bad in her heart. He got up and embraced his wife, saying he wanted to take her on a trip, but his father couldn't calm down his grievances. After getting drunk, he vented his dissatisfaction with his wife, saying that she had no idea how her daughter was really living. But his mother thought that father was just being drunk and crazy at home. The next day, father asked Lan and I out alone, and questioned her about how she was going to handle her husband. Lan and I had her own difficulties in her heart, because the two daughters in the family were still young. To them she was just a stepmother who had just entered the family. Moreover, she also had a son. Lan and I is afraid that she will cause Tom harm, and thinks that she is the only one who should tolerate it, so that her husband will not be embarrassed and maybe even love Tom. But her father still advises Lan and I not to just tolerate, because that will only make her and her grandson more passive at home. Lan and I asks her father not to tell her mother about this, and admits that she will definitely deal with this matter this time. However, her uninformed mother finds her daughter the next day, because her younger sister had found a husband and might get married soon, and she wanted to borrow some money from Jiho for the dowry. Lan and I felt at a loss for words, and had to lie that she would ask her husband for the money after her sister had set a wedding date. Then Lan and I took out an envelope and gave it to her mother, and said that it was a gift from her son-in-law to the two elderly people. The next day Jiho took the whole family on a trip. At this time everyone's face was filled with a very happy smile, but the story was always so unsatisfactory. Jiho's ex-wife called him again. It turned out that his ex-wife had appendicitis, and called her family but got no answer. She had no choice but to call her ex-husband again. Jiho saw his wife and children happily together, and finally chose to hang up on his ex-wife. That night, Jiho took the opportunity to discuss with his daughters settling Tom down at home. However, the eldest daughter strongly opposed accepting Tom, and threatened her father that she would leave home with her younger sister. The father and daughter had a big fight as a result. However, in the night, the eldest daughter secretly woke up her sleeping younger sister, and then ran directly to the police station with her. The two then called their grandmother to inform her. Jiho soon received a phone call from the police station. After Lan and I learned about it, she sent a text message to her father, asking him to go to the police station and bring Tom back home first. Unexpectedly, her father fell asleep and her mother saw the text message. When Lan and I and her husband arrived at the police station, the ex-mother-in-law also arrived at the police station. She directly accused Lan and I of not taking care of her granddaughter, and even forcing the young child to go to the police station. Just as the woman kept on condemning Lan and I's mother also arrived at the police station, and saw her daughter enduring the abuse from others. The mother also went up to defend her daughter without any hesitation, and questioned why the woman was yelling at her daughter. The woman said that her daughter deserved to be scolded, because ever since Lan and I had married into the family, there had been nothing but trouble. Lan and I's mother saw that the woman was being unreasonable, and so she started to fight back. But in the end, with the police officer's persuasion, the two of them finally stopped. At this point, Lan and I's mother finally understood how much her daughter had suffered after her second marriage. She deeply regretted not listening to her husband's advice at home, and instead, she had been greedy and kept exploiting her poor daughter. When she thought about this, Lan and I's mother's tears could not stop flowing. The next day, she found Lan and I, and said, "If you can't stand the injustice, then get a divorce. Your father and I will always be your strongest backing." But Lan and I said she would definitely persevere. She firmly believed that her hard work would be rewarded. Meanwhile, the ex-wife also learned from her mother's lips that Jiho had agreed to register Lan and I's son. She didn't want Tom to share her daughter's wealth, so she decided to go to Jiho to get an explanation. Meanwhile, Lan and I had also dressed up nicely and was preparing to visit her husband. Unexpectedly, The ex-wife called Jiho away first. Lan and I called to ask where her husband was when she saw that he was not there. Unexpectedly, Jiho lied and said that he was at the office. Facing her husband's deception, Lan and I felt very sad. She guessed that her husband must have reunited with his ex-wife at this time. The ex-wife warned Jiho not to agree to register Lan and I's son, because no one should take her daughter's things. When Jiho returned home, Lan and I didn't want to sit around and do nothing. She once again brought up the issue of registering her son with her husband. Jiho pretended to agree as usual. Lan and I didn't dare say anything more as she saw that her husband was in a bad mood. However, in the night, her youngest daughter, who was staying at her grandmother's house, suddenly had a stomachache. Jiho hurriedly took her daughter to the hospital after learning about it. Lan and I couldn't rest assured and hurried over afterwards. However, she happened to see her husband with his ex-wife. Lan and I could only return home alone and dejected. The next day, it rained heavily outside. Jiho's ex-wife and her best friend were stuck in the suburbs while out for a stroll. When the eldest daughter learned that her mother was stranded, she implored her father to go and save her. Meanwhile, Jiho's ex-mother-in-law also called to say that she couldn't get in touch with her daughter and hoped that Jiho could go to the suburbs to check on her. Seeing his frightened daughter, Jiho finally decided to go to the suburbs himself to look for his ex-wife. Lan and I was worried that her husband was in danger and said that they could seek help from the police. But her eldest daughter scolds Lan and I for meddling. Who's going to take responsibility if something happens to her mother? In the end, Jiho ignores Lan and I's objections and leaves the house. Even though Lan and I braves the rain to warn her husband of the danger and dissuade him from going, Jiho doesn't hesitate and accelerates out of the driveway. Lan and I is left alone in the pouring rain, crying in despair. However, when Jiho arrives in a panic in the suburbs, she finds that her ex-wife and her girlfriends have cheerfully boarded a taxi. Then, exhausted both physically and mentally, Jiho did not choose to go home, but instead went directly to the office and stayed overnight. But Lan and I, who was worried about her husband at home, waited all night without closing her eyes. The next day, Lan and I thought long and hard before finally deciding that she could not go on like this, so she mustered her courage and called her husband's ex-wife. After the two met, the ex-wife directly warned Lan and I not to even think about giving her son permanent residency, because Jiho's current assets all belonged to her two daughters. Lan and I nervously clenched her hands after hearing this, but she quickly adjusted her mentality and said that she would not bother her husband about such matters in the future, and that she would just call her if there were any problems with the child in the future. Just then, Jiho called. Lan and I pretended to be very happy, and then took out her husband's bank card to show off in front of her ex-wife. After returning home, Lan and I leaned against the door to relieve her inner tension, and her ex-wife was also bullied so dismally for the first time. In the following days, she woke up every midnight asking about her daughter's situation, and tried every means to cause trouble for Lan and I. But Lan and I always responded with silence, and she was so frustrated that she vented her anger at home. After learning the situation, the mother went to meet Jiho alone, and told him about the two wives meeting in private, and pretended to kindly remind him that Lan and I is a crafty woman. At the same time, the eldest daughter, who had just returned home from school, brought snacks for her younger sister. Tom, who was standing nearby, also really wanted to eat it. The two children fought again. After hearing her younger sister's cries, the eldest daughter directly scolded Tom. Lan and I, who had returned home, happened to see the scene. However, this time, she did not let her son endure bullying as she usually did. Instead, she directly criticized her sister for what she had done. Lan and I's lecture also happened to be heard by Jiho, who had returned home. The two daughters also directly went to their father to cry about it. Soon Jiho called Lan and I over for a private chat. However, before he could say anything, Lan and I took the lead and expressed her thoughts. She said that she would definitely treat the children equally in the future, and that she would be responsible for the children's interactions with their ex-wife in the future. Afterwards, Lan and I picked up her glass of red wine and gulped it down. Jiho was also very surprised by his wife's change. That night, his ex-wife called Lan and I and asked her to bring her daughter over after school. The next day, when Lan and I took her two daughters to her ex-wife's house, she found her ex-wife barefoot and the sound of another man's voice coming from inside the house. After returning home, Lan and I told her husband directly about what had happened. After hearing this, her husband went directly to her ex-wife's house to pick up the children. After the two met, they had a big fight. Jiho forbade his ex-wife from seeing the children again. That day, Lan and I prepared the ingredients and wanted her husband to go with her to her son's outing. However, her husband refused directly, saying that he had a meeting at the company. Lan and I was a little disappointed, but still nodded with a smile. What she didn't expect was that her husband took his ex-wife and children on the outing. The four of them were laughing and talking. The scene was very cheerful. Tom was envious of the other children who had their fathers with them. He really hoped that his father could come with him once. Lan and I could only explain that her father had to go to work. After the event was over, Lan and I was preparing to go home with her son on her back. Unexpectedly, she met her husband and the family of four on the way back. It turned out that her husband had lied about going to the office and had actually gone to meet his ex-wife. Faced with her husband's repeated deception, Lan and I was completely desperate. So that night, while her husband slept, she picked up her phone with trembling hands. What she didn't know was that her husband hadn't fallen asleep at all. While Lan and I anxiously tried to unlock the phone, her husband had quietly come up behind her. Jiho picked up the phone and looked at his wife in disbelief. He never imagined that Lan and I would go through his phone in the middle of the night. How could his usually virtuous wife suddenly turn out like this? Although Jiho did not say the word divorce himself, his words were already very clear. At this time, Lan and I no longer wanted to put up with it. After returning to her room, she slammed the door shut and prepared to vent all the grievances she had endured since her marriage. Lan and I said that she had indeed fallen for Jiho's qualifications when she married him, but after marriage, she had also taken great care of the family. But no matter how much she gives, she is still just a stepmother. Every time she buys her daughter something, she is rejected and insulted. She is told that she is not her real mother and has no right to take care of her. No matter how much she gives, she can't change their opinions. Even her own son has to put up with her daughter's bullying every day. As a mother, she can only choose to tolerate. Not only that, but even now, her husband still calls his ex-wife's mother-in-law. He has never once called her parents. They have been married for so long, but there is still a family photo with his ex-wife hanging in the house. Her husband has never introduced her to his friends, and if she occasionally meets a colleague, she will hide far away. This makes Lan and I feel like she is not the master of this family, but more like a nanny who does the housework and takes care of the children. Because she doesn't want to get divorced again, she chooses to put up with it. But after hearing this, her husband thinks that he has already apologized for these things before, so it has nothing to do with her secretly looking through his phone. Lan and I vents her emotions and turns away, but Jiho grabs him, hoping that Lan and I would listen to his explanation. But in the end, Lan and I still didn't give him a chance to explain. However, when she returned to her parents' house, she found that her parents were also arguing. After persuading her parents, Lan and I was too ashamed to mention her own husband. Poor her. Now she even doesn't have a place to stay. She wanted to find a hotel to get by for one night, but she embarrassingly found that apart from her husband's card, she didn't have any spare cash. Meanwhile, Jiho sat on the sofa in the living room with a vacant stare. And, after thinking about his wife's experience, he also felt his own problem. So he immediately got up and went out to pick up his wife and bring her home. As soon as he left the house, he saw his wife standing on the roadside with a face full of grievances. Jiho didn't hesitate to go up to her and hug her tightly. He explained to his wife that the reason he lied was also to prevent her from thinking about things at home alone. Moreover, he really hadn't done anything to let her down. Jiho promised that this kind of thing would never happen again. Faced with her husband's apology, the kind Lan and I also chose to forgive. After this incident, her husband also began to be honest with his wife. The relationship between the couple gradually became very close, but the eldest daughter saw this and was very jealous inside. The next day, she took the dyed clothes and angrily found Lan and I. Her daughter's unreasonable behavior happened to be seen by Jiho, who was about to go out. He directly scolded his daughter, "How dare you yell at your elders?" As a junior. At this point, Jiho finally understood how much his wife usually tolerated at home. But his daughter still didn't know when to stop. She threatened to run away and go live with her real mother. Jiho angrily grabbed his daughter and confiscated her phone before sending her to her room to think about what she had done. But the older daughter took all her anger out on her stepmother. That day, Lan and I accidentally discovered that her son had actually wet the bed. But her son was already 9 years old and long past the age of wetting the bed, so she took her son to see a psychologist and learned that her son actually had a serious case of depression. Because he had been bullied by his older sister for a long time and didn't dare to resist, it had caused a lot of pent-up anger in Tom's heart because he was worried about his mother. That's why he kept putting up with it. After hearing this, Lan and I felt extremely guilty. If she hadn't been so humble, her son wouldn't have developed depression. In order to help her son resume treatment, Lan and I focused all her energy on her son and stopped tolerating her two stepdaughters. The next day, her youngest daughter mocked Tom for wetting the bed. When Lan and I returned home, she immediately lectured her daughter and told her to apologize to her son. After hearing this, her eldest daughter took her sister to her grandmother to complain and lied that Lan and I often bullied the two sisters at home. After learning about this, her grandmother went home and told her daughter everything. She advised her daughter that it would be best to quickly win her ex-husband back. Meanwhile, the younger daughter saw her younger brother playing with toys while eating and quickly asked her father to scold him. Jiho was about to speak up, but Lan and I preempted her and said that snitching was a bad habit and that they shouldn't snitch on friends at kindergarten. Seeing this, the older daughter deliberately asked her stepmother to get her some water, but Lan and I resolutely refused her request and taught them to solve problems themselves in the future. Jiho was also shocked by her wife's change. At night, when they went to bed, Lan and I came to her husband and said that she might have to sleep with her son for a while. Then she closed the door, leaving her husband with a puzzled face. The next day, Her aunt angrily asked Lan and I why she hadn't done her laundry, but Lan and I didn't meekly endure as she had in the past. She told Anna directly that if she was in a hurry to wear it, she could wash it herself. Her words left her speechless. Later, Lan and I decided to take her son to the playground to relax, so she asked Anna to pick up her daughter from school. Anna was surprised and suspected that Lan and I had taken the wrong medicine, but Lan and I had no intention of considering their feelings. When her husband returned from work, Anna hurriedly complained to her brother. She claimed that her good wife had finally revealed her true face, not washing clothes or doing housework, and only thinking about her own son, and occasionally abuses her two daughters. Jiho was puzzled after hearing this. Recently, his wife's behavior has indeed been a bit unusual. When Lan and I and her daughter had another argument the next day, Jiho first scolded his unrepentant eldest daughter, warning her not to bully her younger brother with her sister in the future. Then he scolded Lan and I alone, not to only care about her own child, and not to distinguish between whose child is whose in the family in the future. Lan and I said that no matter how hard she tried, she could never bridge the gap between them. What was going on between them? The next day, the rebellious eldest daughter even went so far as to skip school. When the ex-wife learned of this, she rushed over angrily to confront Jiho. She thought that Lan and I must have done something to her daughter. Otherwise, the child would not have skipped school for no reason. Jiho then directly called his wife on the phone and scolded her for not even knowing that her daughter had not gone to school. When Lan and I heard the voice of her ex-wife, although she was very angry inside, she eventually restrained herself. Fortunately, her eldest daughter had not run away from home. She was just hiding alone at her grandmother's house. When Jiho and her ex-wife found her, they were directly scolded severely by their daughter. They blamed them for not fulfilling their parental responsibilities after giving birth to her. They made her live in the midst of their endless quarrels since childhood. Moreover, she had to take on the responsibility of taking care of her younger sister every day. Even though she was in pain, she had to endure it and pretend to be strong. The divorce unintentionally caused a lot of psychological harm to their daughters. After Jiho picked up her daughters and returned home, Lan and I, who felt guilty, hurriedly went up to apologize to her eldest daughter. However, Gianna and her husband ignored her and turned directly into their room. Then her husband took out his luggage and lied that he had to go on a business trip for a few days. Before leaving, he warned Lan and I to take care of her two daughters. Countless family conflicts have made both husband and wife feel physically and mentally exhausted. The next day, Lan and I personally took breakfast to please her daughters, but was unexpectedly and fiercely knocked to the ground by her daughter. While her son's depression never subsided, the doctor advised that in order for the child to recover, Lan and I's own sense of happiness must first be enhanced, because Tom's happiness is to see his mother smile every day. Lan and I burst into tears of remorse upon hearing this. The sensible Tom told his mother not to cry. Lan and I then went to her parents' home and told them about her son's illness. Her father suggested that she send the child to her parents' home to be taken care of, but Lan and I directly rejected her father, because she believed that what the child needed most right now was her mother's company. In the evening, Lan and I made her stepdaughter's favorite meals, but the two sisters still ignored their stepmother, and even refused to eat the food Lan and I made, even if it was takeout. Tom said that he also wanted to eat with them, but was directly and ruthlessly rejected by the two sisters. In the evening, Lan and I accidentally discovered the picture book on her son's bedside table. It turned out that her son had vented all his hatred for his sisters on the picture. At this point, Tom's hatred for them had surpassed Lan and I's imagination. For the sake of her son's health, she had to pack up her son's clothes with tears. Although Lan and I was reluctant, she had no choice but to send her son back to his mother's house first. After sending her son away, she also began to take care of her stepdaughter at home. This gradually eased the relationship between them, and Tom's condition also improved under the careful care of his mother's family. Soon after, Jiho finally returned home with her luggage. The couple calmed down and discussed their mistakes together. In the end, they decided to work together to solve the problems between the children. Jiho wanted to ease the rift between Tom and her daughters. Her husband suggested that his wife attend the daughters' family camping trip. This made Lan and I feel flattered. It was the first time she had attended an event as a stepmother after being married for so long. However, her daughters firmly disagreed when they learned about it, and directly told their real mother. Upon hearing this, the ex-wife immediately called Jiho and said that she must go to her daughter's family camping trip. Jiho felt at a loss for what to do with his unreasonable ex-wife. Meanwhile, Lan and I was preparing fruit and snacks. After much consideration, Jiho chose to compromise by asking his wife to go. He begged his wife not to be angry for the sake of their child. Jiho promised that he would send the child off and come back himself, and asked his wife to prepare dinner for them to eat together when he returned. Lan and I was comforted by her husband's words, and hurriedly prepared her husband's usual favorite meal. However, when Jiho was about to go home after dropping off the child at the destination, he discovered that his ex-wife had accidentally fallen and sprained her foot. Jiho had no choice but to stay and take care of his injured ex-wife, although he took the initiative to text Lan and I and confess the truth. Lan and I, who was looking forward to her husband coming home, felt that her feelings had been trampled on again. Just as Jiho had settled everything and was preparing to rush home, he discovered that his ex-wife was sitting alone on a park bench, unable to rest easy. He finally walked over and sat down next to her. As soon as they sat down, they began to accuse each other. The ex-wife blamed Jiho for only knowing work and not having time for her, which caused her to suffer from severe depression after giving birth. Jiho, however, said that the reason he worked so hard was to give her and the child a life free from worry. Even though his ex-wife had squandered all the savings he had earned, Jiho still chose not to divorce her. However, he never expected that his ex-wife would secretly betray him. His ex-wife bluntly said that she was just venting her loneliness at the time. She didn't even think about the other person's appearance or name. This incident has cast a long shadow over Jiho's heart. Therefore, he has never trusted any woman since. The reason he got married again was purely out of consideration for his children. He thought that after he found a second marriage woman with children, his two daughters would be able to live a happy and carefree life. But the result was even more mentally and physically exhausting for him. The two of them unknowingly talked until after 3 a.m. Jiho, who felt something was wrong, wanted to call his wife first to explain, but could never think of a reasonable excuse. Distracted and upset, he simply spent the night in the car. However, the next day, when the family was getting ready to drive back, his ex-wife took one of Jiho's credit cards again, this time under the pretext of buying things for the children. Jiho then hurried back home in a panic. By then, he had already come up with countless excuses to explain to his wife, but Lan and I, who had been waiting all night, only left him with one sentence when she got up: "This ends between us." Jiho felt the gravity of the situation and tried to continue to persuade her, but Lan and I simply shook his hand off and left without hesitation. At this time, his ex-wife took Jiho's card and went shopping, leaving the two children behind and entering the luxury goods store alone. Immersed in various designer bags and unable to extricate herself, Jiena and her mother were just the same, leaving their younger sister behind while they went clothes shopping. And when Jiena had finished trying on clothes, her younger sister had already disappeared, and the irresponsible mother blamed her daughter for not watching her younger sister. And this made Jiena feel especially disappointed in her mother. Jiena felt that in her mother's eyes, she and her younger sister were not worth the price of a bag. She had not forgotten the day her mother left them sisters to go out and play, which caused the younger to take on the role of mother at an early age, feeding her younger sister, doing the laundry, and even changing her diapers herself. So she and her younger sister could never say they had a happy childhood with their mother. The ex-wife suddenly realized how badly she had been regarded by her children. Jiho also hurried to the mall after hearing the news, and, with a heavy heart, hugged his daughter. At that moment, Jiho also completely lost heart for his ex-wife. Fortunately, with the help of the store staff, he was able to quickly find his daughter. After returning home, Jiho looked at the empty closet and felt a great deal of remorse. So he took the gifts and went to his father-in-law's house on his own initiative. This was the first time he had visited his wife's parents since they got married, and it was also the first time Jiho called his father-in-law father. This made Lan and I's parents so happy that they didn't know what to do. Her father also hurriedly prepared a table of good wine and food to entertain his son-in-law. At the dinner table, Jiho kept apologizing to the two elderly people. He confessed that he had not handled many things well after getting married. He sincerely hoped that the two elders could forgive him. At the same time, he sincerely thanked them for raising such an outstanding daughter, so that he was fortunate enough to marry such a wonderful wife. The change in attitude of the son-in-law also made the two elderly people feel very gratified. However, at this time, Lan and I, who had been out, rushed home. Her husband's appearance surprised her. She then hurriedly called her husband back to her room. However, before Lan and I could say anything, Jiho picked up Tom and wanted to go home. Lan and I, who didn't want to worry her parents, had no choice but to follow her husband back first. After returning home, Jiho prepared a candlelit dinner to make his wife happy, and promised Lan and I that he would hurry up and register Tom, and that he would treat Tom like his own son in the future. He even cancelled the credit card spending reminder for Lan and I, so that his wife could freely use the card when shopping in the future. Sure enough, the next day Jiho took Lan and I to meet with a lawyer to complete the paperwork for Tom. But at this time, Jiho's eyes were somewhat distressed. But since then, the atmosphere in the family has indeed been much more harmonious than before. The three children can finally play happily together. However, this happy atmosphere was soon broken by his ex-wife. His ex-mother-in-law found Jiho and hoped that he would remarry with her daughter. But Jiho was determined at this time. No matter how his ex-mother-in-law tried to persuade him, he would not forgive his ex-wife, and he said that he had already registered Lan and I's son as a resident. He had completely accepted this son. Before leaving, Jiho warned her not to interfere in his family's affairs in the future. His mother turned around and told her daughter about it. Upon hearing the news, his ex-wife immediately found Jiho and asked him why he had registered Lan and I's son as a resident. Why should someone with no blood ties to her daughter compete with her for her inheritance? Jiho said that he had accepted Tom and would give him a share of his inheritance just like he had his two daughters. Jiho had a very important contract to sign at the office today, so he didn't have time to argue with his ex-wife. But his ex-wife still refused to give up. She snuck into Jiho's car while he wasn't looking. His ex-wife kept pestering Jiho and wouldn't leave. Along the way, she insulted Lon and I, calling her a scheming woman. She accused him of marrying Jiho for her money and letting their son join the family business so he could inherit it. Jiho said he could do whatever he wanted with his own property. At that moment, Lon and I called. Jiho was about to answer when his ex-wife tried to take the phone from him. The two started to fight over the phone, and they tussled with each other in the car, until the car slowly veered off the normal track. Lon and I rushed to the hospital as soon as she learned that her husband had been in a car accident. However, she found that her husband had been in an accident with his ex-wife. What she didn't expect was that her ex-mother-in-law thanked Jiho for saving her daughter. It turned out that her husband still couldn't let go of his ex-wife. Lon and I was disheartened and turned directly to leave the hospital. At this time, Jiho also discovered the figure of his wife. He struggled to his feet and tried to catch up with his wife to explain, but was knocked to the ground. Lon and I was determined to leave. When she got home, she started packing her clothes. Lon and I didn't want to stay in this sad place for another moment. She then took her son and returned to her parents' home. Meanwhile, Jiho was planning to leave the hospital against medical advice. Before he left, he angrily looked at his ex-wife, and Jiho's life changed drastically because of the accident. Due to missing a very important investment project, the company suffered a serious financial loss. In order to make up for his mistake, Jiho took all the company's assets to cover the loss. In the end, he took the blame and quit his job. Jiho came home to an empty room. Jiho went home and looked at the empty room. He was so lost that he was completely devastated. That night, Jiho rushed to his father-in-law's house with his injured body. He told Lon and I the truth about how his ex-wife had pestered him. He thought his wife would forgive him. Lon and I realized her situation at home. She didn't want to live like that anymore. As long as her two daughters were around, her husband would have nothing to do with his ex-wife. Lon and I's words left her husband speechless. In the end, Jiho left her mother-in-law a sum of money before she left. He asked his wife to stay at her mother's house for a while. He told her to stay at her mother's house for a while to calm down. But Jiho, who was bankrupt, took his children and moved into a rented house overnight. It's hard for them to adapt to the poverty. Luckily, Gianna felt sorry for her father and became very understanding. She took the responsibility of taking care of her sister, so that her father can go out and work to support the family. Then Jiho met Lon and I's father alone. He told him all about his current situation. He said he couldn't bear to have his wife back. When the father found out about the situation, he went home and told his daughter. He told his daughter to think about whether or not to go back and help Jiho. But the mother's attitude changed dramatically. She thought she should have divorced Jiho before he went bankrupt. In this situation, her daughter should not think about going back. Meanwhile, Lon and I's ex-husband is getting out of prison. With his limousine, he seems to be a very important person, and Jiho is now working as a junior product salesman. He's busy at the office every day. Gianna is also taking care of her sister at home. Not being able to cook, the two sisters could only eat instant noodles at home. The next day, Lon and I met the two sisters when she was off work. Because of the past incident, Gianna was too guilty to look up at Lon and I, but she wanted Lon and I to come back to take care of her father and the family. Seeing her daughter become so pitiful, Lon and I's heart was so soft that she finally called out to them. Then she followed Gianna to her husband's new house. Looking at the dishes piled up in the sink, Lon and I first put her little daughter in the bedroom. Then she cleaned the house. When Jiho came home from work, he was surprised to see the house so clean, and there was already dinner in the kitchen. When he realized that Lon and I had come, he ran out to look for her. Jiho was very remorseful at that moment. It's not until you lose something that you realize what's most precious. He didn't know how to cherish such a good wife. The next morning, Gianna realized that her sister was sick, but her father didn't get the call because he was working. She had no choice but to contact Lon and I again. After learning that her little daughter was sick, Lon and I quickly picked up Gianna and ran to the hospital. Luckily, Gianna only had gastroenteritis and was fine. Lon and I then realized that the refrigerator had been emptied. She asked Gianna why her grandmother and mother hadn't come to take care of them. She found out that since Jiho's financial downfall, her daughter's own mother and grandmother hadn't contacted them. Lon and I felt sorry for her daughters, so she braved the cold and washed all the family's clothes. Then she made her daughters some kanji to nourish their stomachs. Before she left, she asked Gianna not to forget to give her sister her medication. When Jiho came home from work, he saw the laundry and bed sheets. He guessed it must be his wife's return, but when he went back to his room in high spirits, he didn't find his wife. When his mother found out that Lon and I had gone to her downtrodden son-in-law's house again, she was even more accusatory. She warned Lon and I to go to Jiho's house as soon as possible. The next day, Lon and I went to the house to cook a meal for the two sisters. The two sisters were very happy to see Lon and I. They didn't realize that Lon and I had come to say goodbye. She hoped Gianna wouldn't contact her again in the future. She told her to take care of her sister at home. Lan and I then hugged each of the poor sisters. Lan and I was heartbroken by the cries of the two sisters. But then Jiho came back from work. Just as Lan and I was about to leave, Jiho grabbed her by the hand. In order not to drag his wife into his predicament, he said that he would soon go with Lan and I to get a divorce. Jiho's two children suffered from his plight. The younger sister disliked her sister's cooking. She cried and wanted to go out for fried chicken. Jiena advised her sister to understand her father's difficulties, but her sister knocked over the bowl on the floor. Seeing the only rice left in the house being wasted by her sister, Jiena got angry and scolded her sister. Outside the door, Jiho heard this and felt very bad. He rushed into the house and picked up his daughter in pain. Feeling guilty, he promised his daughter that he would take them out for fried chicken next week. At that moment, Jiena suddenly covered her nose and ran out. It turned out that her daughter had been suffering from nosebleeds due to overwork. At night, Jiho sat alone on the floor. Tears welled up in the corners of his eyes as he looked at his two sleeping daughters. The breakdown of an adult may be in this moment. Jiena was also bullied by her classmates at school. They teased her that her real mom and stepmom had both run away. The classmates sarcastically called Jiena an unwanted stray dog. Jiena got into a fight with her classmates. Then she went to Lan and I with a bruised face to complain. When she found out that her stepdaughter was being bullied, Lan and I didn't ignore it. She politely gathered the students and parents together. She confessed that the parents' divorce was not the child's fault. The family was living in a rented house after the father went bankrupt. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Who here can guarantee that their lives will be smooth sailing? Lan and I then went on to accurately name the strengths and specialties of each of the children in the room, and said that these were the words Jiena used to praise and envy them in her diary. The students who had bullied Jiena were all in a state of guilt. They sincerely apologized to Jiena. What Lan and I did was seen by Jiho, who came to see her. Afterwards, Jiena sent a special text message to Lan and I, thanking her for going to the school to stand up for herself. But Lan and I's mom accidentally saw the message. The mother accused Lan and I of being divorced and not meddling in her own affairs. She then asked Jiho out alone. She urged him to take her daughter to the divorce office, and told him to take care of his daughter. He told him to stop bothering Lan and I's life. After hearing this, Jiho agreed to his mother-in-law's request. The next day, he took his daughters to eat chicken fried steak. Then Jiho told his daughters not to contact their stepmother again. The daughters were very saddened by this. Soon it was the day they agreed to go through with the divorce. But Jiho was late. Lan and I heard his stomach growling, so she decided to take him there first. She decided to take him to dinner first, and then go through the divorce procedure. Looking at Jiho, who was much more haggard, Lan and I thoughtfully pushed the rice in front of him. At this moment, Jiho gave a heartfelt speech. He thanked Lan and I for her dedication to the family since she married him, and for being so kind to his two children. Jiho regretted that he was always guarding Lan and I. He never cared about her and Tom's feelings, but the disappointment doesn't go away with an apology. Then they went to the civil office to file for divorce. When they got home, Lan and I took off her wedding ring and sealed it away. At the same time, Jiho also took off his ring. Their marriage is over, but Jiena missed her stepmother, so she wrote her a letter. After reading the letter, Lan and I became very conflicted, but her mother kept urging her during dinner. She told her to hurry up and finish the rest of the divorce paperwork. She told her daughter to find a rich man and remarry while she could still have children. The father strongly disagreed with the mother this time. He thought her daughter should find someone in the same situation as her and live with him. She must not cause her grandson any more harm. But Lan and I didn't want to think about marriage at that moment. In the days that followed, she thought back to that day when Jiho cried. In fact, Lan and I wanted to give Jiho another chance, so she texted Jiho and asked him to meet her. After they met, Lan and I teased him. She said that her mind was filled with images of Jiho crying for the past few days. Jiho lowered his head in shame. Lan and I said that they didn't know each other for a long time before they got married. After they got married, they tried their best to disguise themselves for the sake of their family. As a result, they didn't really know each other, and that's why the marriage failed. Then Lan and I suggested that they start as friends and get to know each other again. When he got home, Jiho couldn't hide his joy, so he invited Lan and I out for a drink. Lan and I received the message and smiled happily. After her mother fell asleep, she snuck out. They met at a stall for a drink and a chat. Jiho changed his macho behavior. He thoughtfully wrote down all of Lan and I's favorites and taboos. Lan and I was no longer shy. Her personality gradually became more open. Soon both of them had a heart-thumping understanding to hold hands with each other. Like a couple in love, they became more and more intimate with each other. It's true that distance produces beauty. Just when everyone thought that the two of them would get remarried, Lan and I's ex-husband came to Tom's school after his release from prison. He learned from his son that his ex-wife had divorced, and that she was living at her mother's house. The next day, the ex-husband bought a lot of gifts and came to Lan and I's house. Lan and I's parents were shocked. In order to show their wealth nowadays, Junhee even showed his business card as the current chairman. His mother immediately changed her attitude and asked him if he's remarried. She wanted her daughter to get remarried with him, but the father, who found out the truth, kept urging Junhee to leave. It turns out that his father knew about Junhee's recent release from prison. That's why he doesn't trust him with his daughter and grandson. But Junhee asked his father-in-law if a criminal is not qualified to be a father. When Lan and I came home, her mother told her that Tom's father had come to visit, and that he's now a big boss. But Lan and I says he was pretending. Lan and I still doesn't want to see Junhee again. But Ji-ho, who was in love, made a mistake at work. The company's product lost its place in the trade show. The leader of the company scolded Ji-ho severely. When Lan and I found out about it, he brought Ji-ho to the trade show leader in the middle of the night. Seeing Ji-ho stammered in front of the other party, did not dare to say anything. Lan and I pulled him away and went straight to the leader and began to complain to him. He confessed that he had an old man and a child waiting for them to support him. With a sad face, he begged the leader to help him. Sure enough, after Lan and I's plea, the leader finally agreed to help her. When Lan and I returned home, she was scolded by her mother. She was warned to cut off her relationship with her poor son-in-law. The next day, Junhee came to Lan and I's mother's house. He then took envelopes out of his pocket and gave them to their mothers. The mother liked Junhee more and more, so she left Junhee with good food and wine. When Lan and I returned home, she was shocked at the scene in front of her. Then she got angry and called her ex-husband outside to talk to him. Lan and I was disgusted by such a shameless man. The reason why she and her son have been living in such a lowly state for so many years, it was all to pay off her ex-husband's debts. Luckily, she met Ji-ho, who helped her pay off the debt. She didn't realize that her ex-husband would come to her house now. Junhee thinks that Lan and I has no feelings for her husband. She chose to marry him because she wanted to pay off her debt. Junhee thinks that now is the best time for Lan and I to remarry him. He also said that he is now able to take care of the child. Then he confessed that he wants to send his son to an elite school. Lan and I, however, did not take it well and rebuked Junhee. He said he wouldn't raise Tom during the divorce. Now he's coming back and shamelessly acting as if nothing happened. That night, Lan and I dressed up for the occasion. She lied to her mother that she was going to a tea party with her co-workers. Then she grabbed her clothes and rushed out of the house. It turns out Lan and I couldn't wait to go on a date with her ex-husband. Ji-ho thoughtfully put her hand in his pocket. Lan and I is also holding Ji-ho's sleeve with a happy face. It's hard to tell that they're newly divorced in such a sweet scene, but their date was caught by their mother. Her mother, despite Lan and I's obstruction, turned her back on Ji-ho. She warned him to stay away from her daughter. She told him that her ex-son-in-law is now back. The mother accused Ji-ho that if he had a conscience, he should stop bothering his daughter. When she got home, she called her family to talk to her daughter, but Lan and I praised Ji-ho as a good man. She said that she could only find her heartbeat with him. The father also saw the change in Ji-ho. He recognizes his daughter's current thinking, but the mother thinks that Ji-ho has no money. She scolded Lan and I to recognize the reality. It's not too late to remarry Junhee. At this time, Ji-ho was drinking alone at home. All he could think about was Lan and I. So the next morning, he took the initiative to find Lan and I. He asked Lan and I if she was dating Tom's father. Lan and I denied it and said that her ex-husband had only visited Tom. The two of them didn't meet alone in private. Ji-ho couldn't sleep last night because of this. He said that he could beat any man for Lan and I, but he's afraid that the only one he can't beat is Tom's real father. After hearing this, Lan and I rushed forward to comfort Ji-ho. She confessed that she has no thoughts about her ex-husband. It was only after Lan and I's comfort that Ji-ho's heart finally settled down. And Ji-ho's two daughters were not idle at the moment. They went to the school to send Tom a handmade card. Yeona also prepared candies for Tom. However, the mother thought that Ji-ho was behind what the daughters did. Meanwhile, Ji-ho, who was eating rib soup, received a call from Lan and I, who said to Ji-ho in a cute voice that she also wanted to eat rib soup. When the two hung up, Lan and I accidentally coughed. Unexpectedly, Ji-ho heard it and directly went to her with the rib soup, and also brought her a pack of cold medicine very thoughtfully. This move instantly made Lan and I feel very touched, and decided to personally make Ji-ho her most famous kimchi to eat. However, at this time, Junhee also came to Lan and I's house with gifts, and entered the door and praised Lan and I's mother with sweet words. Her mother also warmly entertained this wealthy son-in-law. Lan and I, who could no longer bear it, directly called her ex-husband over for a private conversation, warning him not to shamelessly come to her house in the future. Unexpectedly, Junhee's face was even thicker than she had imagined, and she even asked Lan and I to bring her son to live with her. Junhee's words left Lan and I speechless. Just as Lan and I and Ji-ho's relationship gradually became as good as before, Ji-ho suddenly received child support from his ex-wife for their two children. Although he was in a desperate situation, he was still prepared to return the child support. However, he discovered that his ex-wife's newly opened fried chicken restaurant had closed down. Just as Ji-ho was about to leave, he met his ex-wife's mother. The two meeting was just seen by Lan and I, who happened to be passing by. The scene in front of her made her feel very uncomfortable. What happened next even more surprised Lan and I. She never imagined that Ji-ho, in such a desperate situation, could still find money to support his ex-wife's family. This instantly shattered all of Lan and I's illusions about Jiho. Meanwhile, Lan and I's mother was at home chatting with Junhee. When she saw her daughter come home, she quickly arranged for Lan and I to go on a date with her ex-son-in-law. Although Lan and I didn't want to, she had no choice because Tom was still at Junhee's place. In the end, she had to meet with her ex-husband. Lan and I rushed over and was about to drag her son home, but the cunning Junhee used the child as an excuse and directly kept Lan and I. She also shamelessly asked Lan and I to take a photo with her son. Jiho had also bought Lan and I a New Year's gift. He arrived at Lan and I's house happily. However, he did not receive a reply to the text message he sent to Lan and I. The temperature was below freezing, and Jiho was shivering. At that moment, a black luxury car drove past Jiho. Then Jiho saw Lan and I get out of the car with her son. He quickly turned his head away when he saw this. At that moment, the driver took out a mink coat from the car and gave it to Lan and I. Jiho looked down at the insignificant gift in his hands, and feeling inferior, he turned around and tried to leave, but happened to bump into Lan and I's father, who also directly advised Jiho to leave his daughter's side. Jiho had no choice but to preserve the little dignity he had. After returning home, he kept thinking about what his ex-father-in-law had said, and conjured up warm images of Lan and I with her ex-husband. Although Jiho was reluctant in his heart, he ultimately chose to let Lan and I go. Let's not meet in the future. Although there are many things I want to say, I'd rather not see you. Back home, Lan and I couldn't figure out why Jiho suddenly wanted to break up. That day, Junhee asked Jiho to meet him at a restaurant. He accused Jiho of having already divorced Lan and I, and told him to stop pestering her shamelessly. A bankrupt penniless man has no right to form a family with Lan and I. Junhee advised Jiho to choose to let go like a man. After a heart-to-heart conversation at home with Lan and I, her father learned that his daughter only felt disgust for Junhee in her heart, and that she didn't want to see him at all if it wasn't for the child. After understanding the situation, her father also advised his daughter to sever ties with Junhee as soon as possible. Otherwise, in the long run, the one who will be hurt is still the child. At her father's persuasion, Lan and I directly asked Junhee to take back the child. In order to sever ties with him, Lan and I directly threw the coat Junhee gave her on his head, and accused Junhee of thinking he was something special just because he had some money. Later, Junhee's father also privately confronted Junhee and made his attitude clear, by saying that he didn't want his daughter to spend her life with a criminal. Tom also doesn't need a father like that. In the future, try to come to our house as little as possible. It was thought that Junhee would give up on Lan and I after this. However, he accidentally discovered that his son had received psychiatric treatment. In a fit of anger, Junhee went straight to Lan and I's house and yelled at her, and pushed Lan and I away, who tried to stop him. Not only that night Junhee met up with Jiho again, and without saying a word, he punched him hard. Then he questioned Jiho about how he had abused Tom before, and how he had allowed a child to become mentally ill at such a young age. Unaware of this, Jiho suddenly realized, and the next day he immediately went to find Lan and I, and blamed Lan and I for not telling him about Tom's illness in the first place. Lan and I said that because Tom was not his biological son, and was worried that he would dislike his son, he chose to hide the truth. Jiho listened and lovingly embraced Lan and I. However, the relationship between the two was thus eased again. Later, Lan and I found Junhee and scolded him for why he hit someone, and because of Tom's illness, his ex-husband was very angry, and decided to take his son back to live with him. But as a mother, Lan and I naturally would not agree. Since the child was born, Junhee has not fulfilled his responsibilities as a father at all, and has not even called to say hello to his son. Not only that, he has even left all the debts to her. Despite Lan and I's words, Junhee still insists on taking the child. It turns out that her ex-husband wants to use this opportunity to blackmail Lan and I into getting back together with him. Junhee says that he is doing this entirely for the sake of the child. Lan and I's mother of course agrees with this, but Lan and I insisted that she would never agree to remarry Junhee. That day, Jiho summoned up the courage to go to Lan and I's house, and begged her mother-in-law to agree to his remarrying Lan and I. But Jiho's situation was now very different from before. Lan and I's mother never even looked at him from beginning to end. Lan and I's father also thought that Jiho was still immature. What could he, who had nothing, do to support his wife and family? Jiho could only leave with his head hung low. Then the father began to seriously advise his daughter. He didn't want his daughter to worry about the next meal. Moreover, the two of them were each bringing up their own children, so the father advised his daughter to focus her energy on her children first, and sever all contact with Jiho. Under pressure from her parents and considering her son's future, Lan and I took the initiative to ask Jiho out, and asked him to give her some time and not to contact her for the time being. She wants to calm down and think about her future. Later, Lan and I went to meet her ex-husband. She just picked up the cup and slammed it on the table. She told her ex-husband that their relationship was like the water in the cup. It ended the day she poured it out. After that, Lan and I got up and left. She thought the entanglement between the three of them would come to an end. But then, her grandmother met her grandfather on the way home from school. Tom was excited to run across the street to find his grandfather, but instead, he was involved in an accident. The doctor told Tom that he might become a vegetable as a result. This made Lon and I feel like the whole world was collapsing. When her ex-husband learned about it, he angrily accused the two elderly people of not watching their child. Lon and I's parents also felt particularly guilty about this. Ji-ho, who knew nothing about it, wanted to contact Lon and I about it, but after thinking about what Lon and I had said, he gave up. At this time, he happened to run into Lon and I's mother, who was going to the hospital. Ji-ho politely greeted her, but was met with a tirade of abuse, warning him to stay out of his daughter's life, and saying that his daughter would soon remarry Junhee, and that he should not greet him on the street again, as it made her feel inferior to someone eating bread on the street. Ji-ho's pride was trampled on by Lon and I's mother. However, the next day he learned from Lon and I's sister that Tom had been in a car accident, so Ji-ho hurried to the hospital. But Lon and I was in no mood to pay attention to him. At the moment, Lon and I was now hoping that her son would wake up soon, and then she advised Ji-ho to go back and not come again. Lon and I's reaction made Ji-ho feel disheartened. Soon after, Tom finally woke up, and the two of them embraced in relief upon hearing the news. Ji-ho saw that Lon and I was deliberately distancing herself from him, so he went to the company and applied to the shareholders for an overseas posting. Ji-ho wanted to completely leave this place that made him sad. Then he went to a roadside stand alone and drank some wine. This is also the place where he and Lon and I had their first date. Ji-ho, touched by the memories, recalled the bits and pieces of his time with Lon and I. It was also from that time that the two fell completely in love with each other. Thinking about this, Ji-ho couldn't help but feel a little regret. The next day, he still chose to go to the hospital to see Lon and I. However, when he arrived at the door, he didn't know how to approach her. While Ji-ho was hesitating and wondering in front of the door, he was just seen by Lon and I's father, who had rushed to visit his grandson. Lon and I's father also wanted to talk to Ji-ho alone about his daughter's situation, so the two of them went to a pub again. Lon and I's father advised Ji-ho to be more open-minded this time, because his daughter might want to get back together with her ex-husband for the sake of their child. Ji-ho felt bad after hearing this, but in his current situation, he simply cannot give his child a future. At this time, Lon and I is at home, being urged by her mother to remarry. Lon and I wants to think about it some more, but her mother scolds her for being so inconsiderate. If she finds a man with no money, Tom's future will definitely not be secure. Now Lon and I is about to turn 40. If she doesn't get married soon, she'll probably never get married. Lon and I feels helpless at her mother's persistence. The next day, Lon and I's aunt encounters Ji-ho at work at the supermarket. Seeing the once glorious Ji-ho now reduced to delivering goods at the supermarket, her outspoken aunt said that it was good that Lon and I divorced him early, otherwise she would still be living this miserable life with him. The condolences from everyone only strengthened Ji-ho's resolve to take up an overseas posting. Meanwhile, Lon and I's family was happily celebrating Tom's discharge from the hospital. Lon and I reluctantly agreed to remarry her ex-husband under the persuasion of her parents. The next day, Junhee took the family to see a large house. Her mother-in-law was overwhelmed with excitement, but Lon and I was the only one who looked glum. She remained glum even when the two of them went to choose wedding dresses, because deep down, Lon and I still didn't want to marry her ex-husband. Later, Junhee gleefully asked Ji-ho out to show off, and warned him not to bother Lon and I's life again. Junhee said that Lon and I actually didn't really have any real feelings for Ji-ho. It was only because Ji-ho had paid off her debt that Lon and I had no choice but to marry him. But things are different now, said Junhee, taking a wad of cash out of her pocket and throwing it on the table, threatening to find Ji-ho some hostesses to entertain him. Facing Junhee's humiliation, Ji-ho did not choose to tolerate, but instead told the other party in detail the various loving scenes he had with Lon and I. These sweet interactions are experiences that Junhee has never experienced before. Junhee, who was so angry that she could not speak, angrily smashed the wine glass against the wall. However, the next day Ji-ho saw Lon and I go with her ex-husband to pick out furniture, and watched as his beloved woman got into his ex-husband's luxury car and left. He never expected that Lon and I would eventually bow to reality. Soon, Ji-ho received an overseas transfer arranged by the company. Before leaving, he specially bought a gift and visited Tom at the kindergarten, and confessed that it was all his fault for not taking good care of him, hoping that Tom would listen to his mother and grow up healthy, and promised to meet again when he grew up. When she returned home that night, Lon and I saw the toy in Tom's hand, and her son had told her everything Ji-ho had said, and Lon and I learned that Ji-ho was preparing to leave, so she went to Ji-ho's room in the middle of the night, and begged him not to leave. Lon and I frankly admitted that the reason she agreed to remarry her ex-husband was entirely to make up for the harm Tom had suffered over the years, but every day after she woke up, Ji-ho was still in her mind. Lon and I asked Ji-ho to give her a little more time. She would figure out how to handle their relationship. The next morning, Lan and I called Junhee over to the house and announced in front of the whole family that she wanted to cancel the wedding with her ex-husband and make a decision after she had thought it over. But her mother said that she had already booked the date and the wedding hotel, and even sent out the wedding invitations to relatives and friends. Junhee was completely unable to sit still at this point, and angrily asked Lan and I if she had broken off the engagement because of Jiho. Lan and I no longer hid her feelings at this point, and frankly admitted that Junhee was nothing compared to Jiho. The reason she hesitated was also entirely out of concern for her son. The next day was Jiho's birthday. Lan and I ordered a cake in advance and arrived at his house, but she didn't know that her ex-husband was following behind her. Learning that Lan and I was celebrating Jiho's birthday, in a rage, Junhee punched her hard. Jiho, who had received a punch for no reason, was naturally unhappy, so he got up and directly fought with Junhee. Lan and I, who couldn't bear to watch, went up and gave Jiho a slap, and this slap completely interrupted all the affection they had previously shared. However, Lan and I didn't know that she had seen Junhee pick up the stick on the ground and had to hit Jiho for fear that Jiho would suffer. But Junhee behind her had seen through it all, and as soon as she recovered, she immediately turned around and confronted Lan and I, who had long since grown disgusted with her ex-husband's violent tendencies and didn't want to live in fear with him every day in the future. So Lan and I resolutely rejected her ex-husband's request to get back together. Junhee, who was furious, went to Lan and I's house and complained, saying that she could no longer bear it. Lan and I had secretly gone to Jiho's birthday party, and fortunately, Jiho arrived in time to stop her. Otherwise, who knows what kind of shameful things might have happened. Lan and I's mother was also very angry when she heard about it. She scolded Lan and I for not knowing how to cherish the good life, and for clinging to that poor man. After Junhee left, Lan and I's mother was even more furious. Her father also blamed Lan and I for what she had done. The next day, Lan and I's mother went to find Junhee to apologize for her daughter. She promised Junhee that she would strictly supervise her daughter in the future and would never let her meet Jiho again. Although Junhee appeared to be troubled on the surface after hearing this, his heart was already overjoyed. Junhee understood that Lan and I's parents were even more anxious than he was. Later, when her mother returned home, she found Lan and I's divorce papers and urged her daughter to hurry and take them to the Civil Affairs Bureau. However, the moment Lan and I handed over the divorce papers, she immediately regretted it, so she grabbed the application form and left. Then Lan and I summoned up the courage to call Jiho, but Jiho saw it and hung up on her. At that time, Jiho was preparing to pack his things to take up a position abroad. While sorting things out, he accidentally found the divorce papers between him and Lan and I, and, recalling that Lan and I had slapped him yesterday, the disheartened Jiho hurriedly took the papers and rushed to the Civil Affairs Bureau, where he handed the agreement to the staff without hesitation. This scene happened to be seen by Lan and I, who had just left the house. The misunderstanding between the two deepened. Lan and I then tore up the agreement without hesitation and decided to go find her ex-husband to get back married. That night, she took the initiative to meet her ex-husband alone and confessed to him that she had completely said goodbye to the past. She asked her ex-husband to forgive her and promised to go through with the wedding as scheduled. The next day, when Jiho and the shareholders were about to say goodbye, they unexpectedly met Junhee. Junhee enthusiastically came up to them and greeted the shareholders. After exchanging pleasantries for a long time, Junhee left contentedly. Then Jiho learned a shocking piece of news from the shareholders. It turned out that Junhee had just been released from prison and was now preparing to get back into the business and make a big splash. In a hurry, Jiho hurriedly made an appointment to meet Lan and I's father and told him everything he had learned. However, he didn't expect that his father-in-law already knew about it and deliberately kept it from Lan and I. Jiho saw that his father-in-law was so stubborn, so he hurriedly called Lan and I to meet up with her. But Lan and I was trying on wedding dresses, and Junhee was by her side. So Lan and I resolutely rejected Jiho's request and warned Jiho not to contact her again. Unexpectedly, the next day Lan and I's mother met Junhee outside the police station. Junhee saw this and quickly lied that the police chief was his friend, and he had come here today to chat with him. An unaware mother was very pleased about this. After returning home, she did not forget to mention this to her husband, complimenting Junhee on how powerful his social circle is. Even the police chief is an old acquaintance of his. This made her father suddenly remember what Jiho said yesterday. The person who was defrauded by Junhee is now preparing to report him. There are also many people who want to take revenge on him. Lan and I's father then realized the seriousness of the situation, so he quickly called Junhee into his room to give him a lecture. Junhee also firmly promised that he would not go astray again, so that Lan and I's father could rest assured and let him take care of his daughter. Unexpectedly, the entire conversation was heard by his mother outside the door. She then rushed into the room and questioned Junhee. No matter how greedy she was, she absolutely would not allow her daughter to marry a man who had committed a crime. That night, her mother looked at her sleeping daughter with concern. She thought to herself, "Why is my daughter's life so miserable?" She had married 3 times but had never met a good man. Unable to sleep, she dragged her old man out for a drink. After weighing the pros and cons, they decided to continue to hide the truth. Although Junhee had committed a crime, Her mother thought it was better than Jiho living in a rented room. At least Junhee could provide for her daughter's daily needs in the future. Her mother thought that marrying Junhee was the best choice for her daughter. So the next day, the two of them asked Junhee out again to warn him not to commit any more crimes after they got married, and demanded that he quickly transfer the property in his name to his daughter's name. Junhee readily agreed to their demands after hearing this. Lan and I looked at the few pieces of jewelry her ex-husband had sent her. Then she took out the wedding ring Jiho had given her. At this point, Lan and I felt that she should also say goodbye to the past, so she went to the river and threw the ring into the river. Unexpectedly, on the way back, she met Jiho with his hand luggage. It turned out that Jiho was going to go abroad for work soon. At this time, he wanted to shake Lan and I's hand to say goodbye. However, the moment Lan and I extended her hand, her wedding ring on her hand broke off completely, Jiho's only glimmer of hope. Finally, the two exchanged blessings with each other before leaving. Soon came the day of Lan and I's wedding, just as her ex-husband appeared at the wedding site in high spirits. Unexpectedly, several plainclothes policemen had been waiting here for a long time. Junhee was arrested by the police at the hotel entrance. The whole family waited at the wedding for a long time, but they never saw the groom's figure. Lan and I's father, who was anxious, called Junhee, but he got the news that his son-in-law had been arrested. Lan and I's father's legs were weak at this time and he almost fell to the ground. However, Lan and I was also impatient at this time, just as she asked her younger sister to go outside to check the situation. She found her parents rushing in. They told her that Junhee was about to go to jail. Lan and I immediately took a taxi to the police station. After meeting with him, she slapped Junhee hard. She never thought that what happened 3 years ago would happen to her again. This shameless man had completely made Lan and I a laughingstock. She was so sad that she felt like crying. After she walked out of the police station, she angrily ripped off her wedding dress. Lan and I questioned her parents. "Is this what you want to see?" And left without looking back. Jiana, who was sitting in the taxi, happened to see Lan and I as she was about to rush to the airport with her father. In order to reunite her father and Lan and I, Jiana pretended to have severe abdominal pain as soon as she boarded the plane. Jiho had no choice but to take his daughter off the plane and rush to the hospital. As a result, his plan to go abroad was delayed once again. Meanwhile, Lan and I also packed her luggage and left her parents' house with her son. She arrived in an unfamiliar city and was ready to start a new life. In order to solve the basic accommodation problems for herself and her son first, Lan and I decided to sell the jewelry her ex-husband gave her, but the result was even more eye-opening. Unexpectedly, the things her ex-husband gave her when they got married were all fake. Although Lan and I was very disappointed, life still had to go on, so with the help of an intermediary, she finally found a house to live in temporarily without paying any deposit. At this time, Lan and I's parents could not contact Lan and I and were extremely worried. In the end, the old couple had to go out into the street and post a missing persons notice. Jiho, on the other hand, made a lot of effort and the company's profits soared. The shareholders then unanimously agreed to let him take charge of the company again, and returned all the assets that Jiho had previously taken out to him. Finally, Jiho finally moved back into the villa with his daughters. After returning to the familiar environment, his longing for Lan and I became even stronger. Lan and I's figure filled every corner of the room. The next day, Jiana accidentally found Lan and I's missing persons notice. She hurriedly told her father the news. Jiho then learned that Lan and I had already left home with Tom, so he hurried to Lan and I's house to inquire about the situation. Lan and I's mother had lost her former arrogance. At this time, she took Jiho's hand and implored him to help find her daughter. Jiho finally agreed with them. He would definitely find Lan and I. Without any savings, Lan and I had to sell sushi for a living. The mother and son could only sell the leftover sushi to feed themselves every day. In this way, Tom, who had no appetite, learned to steal his classmates' snacks at school. When Lan and I learned about this, she angrily took a bamboo stick and whipped her son's calves. Tom cried and wanted to go find his grandfather. Lan and I felt very self-blame in her heart. It was all her own inability that made her son suffer every day. After paying the rent with the money on her body, she could only solve the basic problem of food and clothing. There was simply no money left for her son to improve his diet. In order to prevent her son from continuing to suffer the same way as she did, Lan and I started to get up early every morning and work hard. She got up early in the morning to make sushi and sell it on the flyover. After selling it, she went to the market and got a job selling seafood. At this time, Jiho also spent a lot of money to hire private detectives, hoping that they could find Lan and I's whereabouts as soon as possible. The father hung a picture of his daughter on the street and looked for her every day. He also recorded a video and uploaded it to the internet. Despite this, they still haven't found any news about their daughter. After returning home, the old couple constantly quarrel about this. They blame each other for their previous mistakes. The father, full of remorse, hides in his room and cries. Soon after, the private detectives finally bring good news. They have investigated and found Lan and I's appearance in another city. At this time, the father also learned from a classmate that she had seen Lan and I selling sushi in an underground passage. But coincidentally, Lan and I did not go that day, because Lan and I had fallen ill after working too hard for a long time. But in order to make a living, she dragged her tired body to work at the seafood market. Unfortunately, her parents had no choice but to sit there and wait for their daughter to appear. Sure enough, under the persistence of the two, they finally waited for their daughter. But at this time, Lan and I did not choose to forgive her parents, and directly packed up her stall and planned to leave. Her parents hurriedly went up to hold Lan and I back. As a result, in the tug of war between the two sides, the wrapped sushi accidentally scattered on the ground. Lan and I, who was mentally and physically exhausted, finally exploded at this moment. Watching her elderly mother shove the sushi on the floor into her mouth with huge mouthfuls was too much for Lan and I, who couldn't bear to watch. She grabbed the bag and walked straight out. Her parents saw this and hurriedly chased after her, and persuaded their daughter to go home with them. Her mother then told her that Jiho was looking for her all over the world. This made Lan and I feel even more ashamed, thinking about how she had hurt Jiho so cruelly in order to marry a swindler. Lan and I accused her parents of not telling her this, and hoped to preserve what little self-respect she had left. After saying this, Lan and I quickly turned around and fled. Jiho, who had been unable to find Lan and I for a long time, was also very upset. In the evening, he deliberately came to the house to find Lan and I's father for a drink. However, the family at this time kept the news of finding their daughter from him. His mother even said that she had been looking for her recently and was tired. She also advised Jiho not to look for her anymore. Seeing such an irresponsible family, Jiho was also disheartened and chose to leave. The father, who was worried that Lan and I was suffering, could only hide in a corner every day and watch. At this time, Lan and I happened to meet an aunt who wanted to return a purchase, but when she opened the bag, she found that the fish had already been eaten half by her. Lan and I definitely would not agree to a refund when she saw this, but unexpectedly, this aunt directly came up and grabbed Lan and I's hair. The father, who was hiding in the corner, saw this and hurriedly stepped forward to stop. Unexpectedly, the two women fought more and more fiercely. In desperation, the father had no choice but to take out his phone and call the police, which finally resolved the war between the two women. Afterwards, the father quickly crouched down to help his daughter up, but Lan and I was not in the least grateful, claiming that she was already a person abandoned by her parents, and that even if she died in the future, she absolutely did not want them to bother. The father also felt a great deal of self-blame about this, so when he got home, he told his mother what had happened to Lan and I. The next day, his mother came to the door with dinner waiting for Lan and I to get off work. She wanted to improve the food for her daughter and grandson, but Lan and I just knocked the food onto the floor. Looking at her mother's guilty expression, Lan and I felt a little bit of sympathy, but in the end she ruthlessly told her mother to leave. The reason she ran away from home was to prove to them, even though she had been divorced twice, she could still support herself and her son. When father saw mother come back in a daze, he hurriedly went up to comfort her, and advised her to put aside her daughter's affairs for the time being. Why not go to the living room and watch TV to ease your mood? Unexpectedly, Jiho suddenly paid a visit at this time. After entering the door, he found that his father-in-law's family was sitting in front of the TV, relaxed and watching entertainment programs. Jiho was furious and directly turned off the TV, and then angrily rebuked the whole family for being outrageous. Lan and I is dead or alive? They don't know. As parents, how can they still have the mood to watch TV here? After Jiho finished speaking, he angrily got up and left the room. When he saw his son-in-law was angry, Lan and I's father hurriedly chased after him, and finally told him the truth. After learning the news, Jiho immediately drove to the market to look for Lan and I. When he arrived at the market, he happened to see Lan and I hurrying to make a delivery with a fish bowl on her head. When Lan and I saw Jiho, she panicked and knocked over the fish bowl on her head. Just as she was crouching on the ground preparing to pick up the fish, Jiho didn't hesitate and walked up to her, holding her in his arms, begging Lan and I to stay by his side forever. But at this moment, Lan and I had no face to face Jiho, so she pushed Jiho away and told him that she was no longer qualified to talk about love. Lan and I did not wait for Jiho to react, and disappeared into the crowd again with the fish bowl on her head. However, the next day, Jiho came to find Lan and I again, hoping that she would completely let go of the past and go back with him to start a new life. However, Lan and I was still bitter about the previous marriage. No matter how Jiho persuaded her, she was determined to live on her own. Although Lan and I worked hard every day to support the family, it was still hard on her obedient son, who was dependent on her. Soon after, her father could no longer bear to see this. He quietly went to the school to visit his grandson. He also took Tom out for a meal of braised pork. However, this was the first time the child had eaten meat since leaving home. In the past, he had always eaten the leftover seaweed rolls his mother sold at home. Grandpa felt very sad as he touched his grandson's thin body. Then he followed Tom to his daughter's place. He looked around at the simple environment in the room, then leaned down to feel the cold floor. He opened the door and discovered that his daughter was still using briquettes for heating. He really couldn't bear to let his grandson live in such an environment. In the end, the father decided to take Tom back home first. Lan and I, realizing that her child had been taken back to her parents' home, came angrily to forcibly take Tom back. No matter how Tom cried and screamed, it was useless. At this time, Lan and I no longer wanted to listen to her parents' persuasion, and resolutely took her son back home. This gradually made Tom hate his mother. Every day, he would think of various reasons to oppose her. He also learned to pretend to be sick and not go to school. Under this situation, Lan and I had no choice but to take Tom to the market with her to work. However, she does not know the real reason why her son does not want to go to school is because his classmates all dislike the unpleasant fishy smell that comes from Tom's body. After Jiho was repeatedly rejected by Lan and I, he shifted his target to Tom and made up for his previous wrongdoings towards Tom. So Jiho first took Tom to the supermarket to buy a bunch of snacks and then followed Tom to the rental house. Meanwhile, Lan and I, who could not find her son, hurried home anxiously. When she entered the house, she found Jiho eating tteokbokki with her son. In a rage, Lan and I called Jiho out of the room and warned him not to disturb her life again. Unexpectedly, Jiho shamelessly pestered Lan and I in Tom's name, and even in order to successfully win back Lan and I's heart, he asked his two daughters to cooperate with him and take the initiative to ask Tom out for a walk. Lan and I, who was worried about her children, had no choice but to go out with them. This finally eased the tension between the two. After returning home, Gianna encouraged her father to quickly bring his new wife home to live with them. It had to be said that Gianna had really grown up after this experience. Meanwhile, Tom was also doing his homework on his mother. He kept saying that he hoped Jiho would be his father. Lan and I was thoughtful after hearing this, and her heart became very complicated. The next morning, Jiho mustered up his courage and went to Lan and I's parents' house, and declared in front of the whole family his determination to remarry Lan and I. Faced with Jiho's sincere attitude, Lan and I's parents were also very happy. Although they still didn't know that Jiho had already moved back into the villa, they finally accepted him as their poor son-in-law. That evening, Jiho shamelessly showed up at Lan and I's house again. He lied that it was a very special day, so he took Lan and I to a Western restaurant to improve their diet, in order to make the other person happy. Jiho secretly kept teasing Lan and I with his feet while they were eating, while pretending to be very serious on the surface. After returning home, Jiho again lied that he did not drive, and begged Lan and I to let him stay at her place for the night. After chatting with each other for a while, Lan and I, who had been tired after a long day, fell asleep quickly. Unexpectedly, Jiho took advantage of Lan and I falling asleep to finish all her remaining work, and left a very touching note before leaving. "Today is the day we first met. At the time, I didn't know I would fall so deeply in love with you. We are people who met again after twists and turns. It's fine if you can't accept me right away, but remember to finish eating before working." Lan and I was very moved after reading it, and Jiho's sincere attitude made her waver. Jiho took Tom with him almost every day to improve his diet, and the two became closer and closer. Tom also directly called Jiho dad. This strengthened Jiho's confidence in winning back Lan and I. After dropping Tom off at school, Jiho hurried to the market to show off to Lan and I. Lan and I warned Jiho not to hurt Tom again as he had done in the past, but Jiho firmly promised that he would be Tom's last dad. Then he went straight to help Lan and I with her busy work. However, Tom was not happy at school. He was still being teased by his classmates for smelling of fish. His pride hurt. Tom soaked his clothes in water when he got home. When Lan and I returned home, she was very angry when she saw this. She picked up a cane and was about to teach Tom a lesson. Fortunately, Lan and I's younger brother appeared in time to stop her. Then the younger brother called Lan and I out alone, and told her about Tom being teased by his classmates at school. The reason Tom doesn't go to school is because his classmates don't like the smell of fish on him. Then the younger brother persuaded his sister to let Tom come home. After learning the truth, Lan and I felt very guilty. Looking at her sleeping son, she couldn't help but cry. Then Lan and I, full of guilt, broke the cane in her hand. She lay on her son with a heart full of pain, and stroked his face with her hands. The next day, Lan and I sent Tom back to her parents' home, and asked them to help look after her child, and gave them her son's monthly living expenses. Although her mother refused to accept it, her father understood that his daughter was upholding her dignity, so he agreed to accept Tom's living expenses. After sending her son away, Lan and I was so frugal that she didn't even turn on the heating, and as a result, she successfully caught a cold. Jiho saw this and quickly took her to a restaurant to eat a warm meal. At this time, Lan and I suddenly asked Jiho for money, saying that she wanted to run a snack bar. Seeing an opportunity, Jiho secretly rejoiced in his heart. He then generously confessed that of course there was no problem with lending money, but he required Lan and I to accompany him on dates once a week as interest. Seeing Jiho flirting with her in such a smooth-talking manner, Lan and I directly gave him a hard kick. The next day, Lan and I returned to her parents' home to discuss the plan of opening a shop with them. After listening, the old couple also felt that opening a shop was a good choice. Her mother took this opportunity to persuade her daughter to move back home. In this way, not only could she save living expenses and be able to see her son every day, after some persuasion from her parents, Lan and I finally agreed to move back home. Jiho, who had heard the news, hurried over to help Lan and I pack. In the days that followed, Jiho was always by Lan and I's side, whether she was choosing a shop or going out to hand out flyers. Jiho certainly didn't let go of any opportunity to impress Lan and I. Soon Lan and I's snack bar opened successfully with Jiho's help. When the first customer arrived, Jiho tried to coax the customer with sweet words to make him happy, but Lan and I did not change her mind and continued to support herself with her own hands. Jiho saw that pestering her was not going to work, and so he changed his strategy. This day he deliberately nagged Lan and I, lying that the children had all suggested that he find another woman to come home to, and that he should choose someone young and pretty, and never marry a second wife with children again, the kind who will just take the kids and leave if he gets angry. But Lan and I was not buying it, and told Jiho that he should spend more time on his business, so that he could buy a nice house and make his children's lives more comfortable. And then Lan and I told Jiho to shut up and get out of there, and Jiho said he would never come back, and then he picked up his clothes and left. It was after 10 o'clock at night, and Lan and I still hadn't seen Jiho's figure. At this moment, she couldn't help feeling a little lost in her heart. In the end, she had to close the door listlessly and prepare to go home. Unexpectedly, Jiho appeared again at this time. Then he took Lan and I to the old place to have a late-night snack. Jiho thought that the relationship between the two had come to this point, even if it was a cold heart. It was time to be moved by oneself. But Lan and I was already obsessed with the feeling of earning money to support herself, so she has no intention of thinking about marriage at the moment. After all, in this world, money is the most reliable thing. Jiho couldn't hold back any longer after hearing this. He questioned Lan and I, "Do you really not care if I go find another woman to marry?" Although Lan and I's face already revealed that she cared very much, she still stubbornly refused to admit it. Jiho had no way to deal with her at this point. He had no choice but to seek help from Lan and I's parents, hoping that they could persuade Lan and I for him. The old couple were of course happy to help their son-in-law. However, Lan and I still insisted that she didn't want to get married, because she didn't want to rely on a man to change her fate as she had done in the past. Her only current thought was to raise Tom properly. After learning that Lan and I had no intention of getting back together with him, the next day Jiho went directly to the shop to find Lan and I. Jiho said that even for the sake of the child, he could not wait any longer. So the next day, with his sister's help, he participated in various blind dates. Jiho did not forget to come to Lan and I to brag a bit, and praised the person he met on the blind date as being young and beautiful. Lan and I's body could not help but tremble a little after hearing this news. Then she pretended to be calm and asked Jiho if he was satisfied with this blind date. Unexpectedly, she heard Jiho praise the other person non-stop, and frankly admit that the other person would definitely be able to serve as the child's stepmother in the future. Hearing Jiho's attitude, Lan and I could no longer sit still, because she never imagined that Jiho would marry another woman, and began to scold Jiho for marrying so hastily, even for the sake of the child. Jiho saw this and asked Lan and I why she was so emotional. Seeing that her little scheme had been discovered, Lan and I panicked a little inside, and accidentally knocked over the basin of water in her hands. Jiho saw this and quickly stepped forward to grab Lan and I, and hoped that she would give him a clear answer at this moment. However, Lan and I still did not change her mind. This made Jiho turn around and leave again in disappointment. However, the next day Lan and I happened to meet Jiena in front of the store, so she asked Jiena why she hadn't visited her at the store recently. Unexpectedly, Jiena said that her father was getting married soon, and she told them not to come to the store to find Lan and I anymore. At this time, Lan and I also fully felt the seriousness of the matter, because this time she might really lose Jiho's company forever. After learning the news, her younger brother hurried to the store to persuade Lan and I, and took out a wedding invitation for Jiho from his pocket. Lan and I still showed a carefree look. Her younger brother really couldn't understand why his sister was torturing herself like this. Unwillingly, Jiho took the initiative to find Lan and I again in the evening, and tried to persuade her one last time. Unexpectedly, he received the same merciless rejection. Soon it was the day of Jiho's wedding, and Lan and I woke up early in the morning with a distracted look on her face, and then accidentally cut her finger. When she was about to find a wound sticker, her mind associated it with the scene of Jiho bandaging her finger. At this moment Lan and I finally understood how important Jiho's place in her heart was, so she hurried to the hotel to try to stop the wedding. However, when she pushed open the door to the wedding hall, she found that except for Jiho, the huge church was empty. Lan and I walked over to Jiho with a puzzled expression on her face and asked him what was going on. Unexpectedly, Jiho said that he had been waiting here for Lan and I to appear. Unaware of what was going on, Lan and I opened the invitation with a confused look on her face. However, she discovered that the bride's name was actually hers. It turned out that this was all a carefully planned proposal scene by Jiho. Before Lan and I had time to react, Jiho knelt down on one knee and took out the wedding ring he had prepared long ago, slowly putting it on Lan and I's hand. At this moment, Lan and I was finally moved by Jiho's sincerity. Although the wedding venue was a bit simple and sloppy, for the two of them, it didn't matter anymore. Jiho then took Lan and I directly back to the villa they once lived in. Lan and I saw this and hurriedly asked him if he had been testing her. Just as she was about to turn around and leave in anger, Jiho quickly stepped forward and embraced her in his arms. Jiho was grateful that Lan and I had chosen him when he was down and out. Jiho vowed to love her forever. The family then sat together to celebrate Lan and I and Tom's return. Later that night, Gianna took Lan and I's hand and finally called her mom. Lan and I was overjoyed. At this point, she no longer acted as meekly as usual. When faced with her aunt's nagging, Lan and I also learned to decisively reject her demands, saying that she would no longer prepare her midnight snacks alone, and that she would take care of her aunt's clothes from now on. Lan and I's change left the other person stunned, so she ran to her brother as usual to complain, but Jiho no longer defended her as before. Not only that, Gianna also stood up and accused her aunt, and the harmonious state of the family did not last long before problems arose again. It turned out that Lan and I had a fight with Jiho over the education of their daughter, and as a result, both of them could not sleep at night, so they sat down calmly and communicated with each other. Lan and I still said that she would treat her younger sister like her own child in the future, but she would never compromise on the principles of child rearing. Jiho, on the other hand, was already different from the past. The conflict between the two was quickly resolved with Jiho's compromise. After this ordeal, their relationship has become even stronger. 3 months later, Lan and I attends her younger brother's wedding. However, she suddenly discovers that she is pregnant. Jiho is shocked to hear the news. Their father says that he will help raise the child. The film ends here.